Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Jacob with Bulldog Analytics, and today I want to present a couple different potential solutions to a problem that I'm often faced with. Now, imagine that you have a list of keywords, and these keywords need to be compared to a data table, specifically a text column, and we want to see if one or multiple of those keywords are contained in any of those descriptions. Now, the latest example that I used kind of with this approach was we were building out a suspicious expenses report. So we had a employee expense report, and we had a list of keywords that might indicate whether that expense was suspicious or not. So think in a professional setting, you wouldn't see things like Etsy or Amazon or Apple, depending on where you work. So I think those were some of the examples we had in our suspicious expense keywords list. Now, the idea is we want to see where those potentially exist in any of the expense reporting, and then we want to be able to see true or false, did it match? If there were one or multiple matches, then what were those matches? So I've got a couple different solutions in Power Query, and I've also got one approach using DAX calculated columns that I'd love to present to you today. I'm going to try to keep it pretty succinct. I've actually got the example file linked in the bio so that you can download and kind of look through it on your own computer, and I think that's going to help keep the videos a little bit shorter, so I'm not having to dig as much into all the specificities, I guess, of the code, whether it be M language or DAX. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so as you can see on my screen, I've got Power Query pulled up, and that's where we're going to start our discussion today. So this is actually going to be, in this example, looking at essentially a bank statement list of merchants, and then seeing if they align to what could potentially be an Amazon expense. So here you can see I've created kind of this custom Amazon keywords in a list format, and it's defined as a list using these curly brackets. And so you can see I've got 5 different potential matches: Amazon, AMZN, Amazon.com, Prime, and AZ Prime. Now, we're going to compare this against the merchant list contained in my bank statement, theoretically. And obviously, when we do that comparison, we want to take a case insensitive approach so that it considers upper or lowercase merchants. So this is my merchant list, as you can see here. And so we would expect most of these to be matches. There's a couple exceptions, for example, online purchase, movie rental AMZ, and then Jeff Bezos. I think those are going to be the items that don't have a keyword list. But yeah, so let's go ahead and dive in and see how we can go about creating this analysis to identify where matches are occurring. So as you can see, I've got 3 approaches here in Power Query, and then we're going to jump out and go into DAX and use one with the calculated columns approach. Now, a quick note, if there's stuff that I can do in Power Query over DAX, I oftentimes try to do it because amongst many things, it's generally going to be better performance, especially when you're creating calculated columns. But my personal rule of thumb is to always try to move things as far upstream as possible, just for a better process. So, speaking on that topic, if there's anything that you can ever do where you can push it all the way to a user review at your source, or even include it in the native SQL statement, I personally do that because I think it reduces the overall impact to your Power BI report performance. But enough of that, let's go ahead and get back on topic. And note that our keywords list is in a list format, so there are differences and intricacies between tables and lists, and I think either one would work, but we're taking a list approach. The first 2 solutions, we're actually going to use the function list transform combined with another function called text contains, and this is going to give us the ability to iterate over a list of keywords to determine if any matches exist, and then provide an output based on how we structure the query. The third method actually is something that I based off of a solution I found from the YouTuber Kerbal, I think is how you say it, Curbal, but I altered it a little bit so that there's only one unique row for each merchant instead of having multiple. So anyways, let's go ahead and dive in so that you can see what I'm talking about. So for the method 1, you can see that the output basically takes the keywords that match or are found in the merchant description, and then it lists them here with a comma delimiter, and then it over here defines a true false for matches or no matches. There are instances where we don't necessarily need the insight into which keyword is found. We just want to identify whether it's Amazon or not, and then there's other instances where I could see that this information is helpful. So we went ahead and provided that here. And the way that we did that was through the use of, like I said, list transform combined with the text contains. So what you see here is actually, obviously we're adding a column. So this is a custom column that we created and we titled it all keywords found. So if I were to click into any of these lists, you'll see that down below, it lists all the keywords that are found. So I think for Amazon and Prime, there would be multiple Amazon Prime, and then here as well, even though it's all one string of characters, it still finds Amazon and Prime. Now, the way that we're able to create this list is through the list transform function. And you see that the first argument that we input in the list transform function is the list itself. So we make a reference to that. And then we define what's called a function. Now, I know we just called list transform and text contains a function. This is also a function, just different. So anyways, we define a variable in parentheses, and I just default to X because that's the easiest variable to use. And then we use the equal greater than sign to create an arrow. That's standard syntax for defining these functions within these list formulas. So basically, now that we've defined this function, the action that follows is going to iterate through that list that we define in the first argument of the list transform function here in this example. So you can see that we have if text contains, and if we hover over text contains, the first argument is text, and then the second argument is substring, and it says that it returns whether the text contains the substring. So for text contains, we want to see whether the merchant, so the result considering the row context, so first row would be Amazon, second row, Amazon.com, so on and so forth, contains any of the keywords found in the list here. And again, being used within a list formula or function allows this to iterate through all the potential values of X. So all 5 of those keywords in the Amazon keywords list. So it says, if that keyword is found in merchant, then return that value. If not, return null. And now we've also got this additional parameter here, and this basically allows us to ignore the case of the argument. So you saw in our Amazon keywords list, for example, that we have AMZN with only the A being uppercase, whereas in this example, we have AMZN all uppercase. So we want to ignore the case and be able to determine whether it's present or not. So let's jump back up to list transform, and you'll see that it returns AMZN as a match. And so because we created that list, we can now extract the values. And so the way to do that without creating additional rows, because typically if you just clicked expand to new rows, it would create a new row based on basically each combination of values. But we click extract values, and then we'll just do this as a quick example. I don't know why it's doing that really small, but we'll just zoom in. If you drop down, you can click custom, and then basically you would just do comma space and click OK, and then it would return the extracted and concatenated values with a comma delimiter. So that's really powerful. And sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. Next, we basically just want to have a true or false column. And obviously I've changed the type of that there as well. But what I did there was a simple if statement. Now method 2 is very similar to method 1, except I left out some of the details. So if I jump down to method 2 and I jump back up to the list transform step, you'll see that instead of having that if statement following the X variable in our function over here, it literally just is the text contains function. So that's going to return a true or a false. As an example, I can click on Amazon Prime. You'll see that there is 2 trues, which we know Amazon is one keyword, Prime is another keyword, so that's expected, but it's not giving me that level of detail as far as which keywords are found. Maybe that's not important. This kind of simplifies the number of applied steps and makes it a little bit more straightforward. Now there's one different function that we use in this method, and if I click down to this next step, you'll see that I have this list if any true, and then I reference that check for keyword list column. A change type occurred, I removed that list column, and then there you have it, just a very straightforward filter to determine whether a match was found or not. Now this last method I thought was just kind of something cool to share. Again, the same source step with the change type, but then we add this additional column, and literally this column is just a direct reference to the Amazon keywords list. So it's basically going to return 5 results for every single merchant because there's 5 keywords in the Amazon keywords list. And so when I expand that out, you'll see that there's 5 lines for every merchant: Amazon, Amazon.com, AMZN, Prime, etc. And so you can add this custom column, and basically it just says if text contains, and then it looks at merchant and compares it to the keyword column right here. And then again, it ignores case. And so basically, if there's a match, in this instance, I want to return 1, else 0. Now you'll see why I did an if statement here with the numbers 1 and 0 here in just a second, instead of just letting it return true or false. But we actually then applied a grouped function. And I did this grouping on merchant and keyword match. Now I'm going to show you how to perform that group by action real quick. So under transform, you're going to go to the far left and click group by. Now in this instance, I want to group by the merchant name, and then I want to group by whether there's a match or not, to kind of group together what's true and what's false. So I'm going to click over to advanced, and I'm going to add a grouping on the keyword match. Down here, I'm going to rename this. We'll just call it keyword matches, and then instead of performing any operation, I'm going to click this drop down, and I want to see all rows, and this is basically going to return a table containing all rows that are associated with the table as we see it right now. So you'll see that a little bit more clearly here in a second. If I click OK, now when I click on the first example as an example, you'll see that it has merchant keyword match. If we jump down to prime, we've already used that as an example. It has 2 matches. And so instead of seeing all 3 columns, I just want to see the keywords in the middle there. So I'm actually going to come up here and manipulate some of this code. So just for a little bit more ease of reading, I'm going to break this down to the bottom. What this is doing, it's got this double curly brackets. It's defining out the elements within this table here. And I don't want to see this as a type table. I just want to see it as a list. So I want to delete all this stuff out over here. And here I'm just going to define the keywords column. So I'm going to write it like this, right next to that little underscore, and I'm going to click check. And now you'll see that it converts it to a list. And for Amazon Prime as our example, if I click on that, it's going to now list Amazon and Prime. And that's where the keywords do match. If I were to click down to the 0, you'll see that it has all of its non-matches. So that goes for all of the different merchants as well. Now, because that's a duplicated step, I'm going to go ahead and delete what we just did. And I'm going to click down to the existing grouped rows step. Now we'll click down to the next step. And what you'll see here is that we performed a value extraction. So how we do this is on a list, because we've converted this to a list, you can click these little arrows right here and you can do extract values like we did on the other methods. Click insert, and we want to do a custom delimiter, which is comma space. So when you click OK, it provides all those matches for the 1s and non-matches for the 0s. It's going to kick out an error now that we created that kind of duplicate step. So let me delete that. All right, so I could filter this on just the keyword match equals 1, but then, if we're looking at a transaction list and we want to tag things as, yes, there's a match, no, there's not a match, that would end up excluding a lot of data that we still need in our report. So in order to avoid a lot of the duplicates that we're seeing here, we're actually going to add a custom column. So you'll see here that it's a simple if statement. I say if the keyword match over here equals 0, then null, else keyword match. That gets a change type applied to it. Now that I've referenced the 0 or 1, over here we can change the type of the keyword match to true, false, or that Boolean type. And then we're going to do another grouping. We're going to group by merchant and keyword matches, and then we're basically going to use the max aggregation in order to only pull back the items that have duplicates. So for example, Amazon, the max will return the line with a value, and it'll exclude the line with the nulls. Whereas lines like Jeff Bezos or online purchase, we'll still get those included, because technically, even though there's only one null row, that's going to be the max. So that follows the same steps that we looked at earlier, except the aggregation would be max. And as you can see, that returns the same values that we had in method 1. And if we want to create a match column for true, false, we can add a column similar like we did here in method 1 as well. So that is the approach in Power Query. Let's go ahead and close this out and look at DAX. All right, here's our canvas. Let's go ahead and click over to the table view, and we're going to be looking at this merchant list table. Now we saw this in Power Query, but in Power Query you only have visibility to the merchant column, and that's because this second column that we created is using DAX calculated columns. That's not something that we have access to or visibility to in Power Query. It's just a front-end component in the reporting, but it still would be very valuable if you wanted to take this approach. So basically what we're doing is in the code, again, this is a calculated column. We're defining a variable for merchant. So whenever you do this without some sort of aggregation tied to it, because it recognizes the row context of whichever row it's evaluating on, it kind of saves that in memory for the variable whenever we want to reference it later. So for example, Amazon would be Amazon, Amazon.com, and it wouldn't have to use like a selected value function or anything like that. So below that, we're using the concatenate X function. So it's an iterator function. We want to use this just so that we can concatenate all the different keyword matches. And how we're going to do that is by using the filter function for our table value in the concatenate X iterator function. So within the filter function, we're going to reference our keywords list. Right past that, the logic that we're going to use is we want to find the Amazon keywords list values, and we're going to use this upper formula in order to align all the case between the two. So we're going to do upper for the Amazon keywords list, and then we're going to compare that against the upper merchant list, and we're again referencing merchant here, which is the variable, so it's the row context as we iterate down the row and create our calculated column. And so if we find anything, we want to return a 1, and if not, we return 0. And basically the logic here is that we want whatever result here to be greater than 0, meaning that a match was found. And so that's our filter within the filter function there. And then here for the concatenate X portion, the way that we're going to structure this is we're going to return the Amazon keyword list that matches, and then we're going to separate it by a comma and a space, similar to how we did it in Power Query. And when I click check, as you can see, it includes all the same matches as we saw in Power Query. All right, guys, that's all for this video. I hope you learned something today. And if you did, please like and subscribe and share with any friends and colleagues. I've got a big project coming up, a portfolio project where I've got a bunch of content that I'm going to be sharing around, walking through how all that is put together. So I hope that you stick around and check that out. Hope to see you in the next video.